So here we are. It's here today. What a wild ride it's been on the way to Benn Eubank. Let's just go over sort of the turn of events and bring us up to speed as to where we are at this point. We had the weigh-ins yesterday. We had Eubank that failed to make weight, albeit by small amount, and then we had Conor Benn who came in at 156 and a bit, so didn't even reach the 160 middleweight limit. So that is really an indication on how big really the natural weight difference or the natural size difference is between these two. You've got Eubank Jr. who couldn't make the weight, and you've got Conor Benn who didn't really, in terms of making weight sort of increments, didn't really even come close to making the weight. They say that was intentional because he wants to come in not heavy, he wants to retain his speed and explosiveness. So that's the reason why. And certainly we're led to believe he walks around a lot heavier than that. But I think just the amount that he's putting into the camp, the amount he's put into training, has just dictated he's coming around that weight, and he wants to come in and retain speed and explosiveness. So, but it is a real indicator on how different these two guys are in size naturally. Eubank Jr., there's been so much made of this Eubank Jr. making the weight and then the rehydration clause, and then Eubank Jr. posts little videos of him making the weight, and people come out and they're shocked. You know, oh, he looks this, he looks dead, you know, look what he's having to do. Listen, this is the way fighters make weight. This is the way fighters have always made weight. There's nothing different with him in the heat blanket, him wrapped up in towels, him in the bath. This is the way fighters have always made weight. This is the way Eubank has always made weight. No one had a problem with Eubank making the weight against Arameta. It wasn't talked about. It wasn't an issue. So why it should be talked about this time, I don't know. The only difference is this time is the rehydration clause. Now, if you're to believe that Chris kind of puts on about 12 to 14 pounds come fight time, whatever, he had a 10, so the 10 pound rehydration clause was till, we're led to believe, 8 o'clock this morning. Okay, so he had to save 10 overnight. He had to be within 10 overnight. So he's going to have had an uncomfortable night overnight. But he's got from 8 o'clock this morning. So 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22. So he will have 15 hours. If 8 o'clock this morning is correct, he will have 15 hours to add to the £10 allocation he had for the rehydration clause. So I'm not a fan of the rehydration clause, okay? But I'm also not a fan of fighters boiling themselves down to near death just for a small incremental advantage over their opponent, because you get to a point of diminishing returns. And you can talk about the rehydration clause. Well, you know, you could look at it like, well, if there wasn't a rehydration clause, if fighters didn't boil themselves down to dangerous limits, the rehydration clause wouldn't even be a factor. And I'll go one more, just to put some sort of relevance to this and perspective. I remember the days of the same day weigh-in. Okay, so if we're going to talk about rehydration, let's just put it in perspective. There was a time in history when we had same day weigh-ins. So let's just, when we talk about the weight, Chris is fought at this weight for the last 3 fights, I think, and no one really talked about it. No one really had an issue with it. Okay, so this time nothing's different. There is a rehydration clause. I'm not a fan of them, but it is what it is. It's £10, and from 8 o'clock this morning, he will have sort of 15 hours to rehydrate as he likes. So will it have an active factor? Possibly, but I think it's being blown way out of all proportion. It's not great, but they also talk about the fine, and it was a lot of fucking money. But let's not remember, that will have been in the contract. So that will not have been a surprise. That would have always been there. They would have known that would have been the fine or the punishment for not making a weight. Saying that, I would like to know what the board does with that money, because is the board putting that towards fighters? Is that recirculating his way back into the game to ex-fighters, whatever? I'd like to know. Same with the fine for the egg. Where's that money going? Because we have a lot of excuses from the board, from Robert Smith, about how it's filtered back into, you know, treatment and this, that, and the other. And I'd like to know. I'd like to know where that's going. And then we get to the fight itself. So as I said, with the weights, it's a massive indication of how really there is a massive difference in the size of these two guys, because you had Chris who couldn't make the weight, and you had Conor Benn who didn't even come in really close to the weight. 156 and a bit, and he could have come in at 160. Regardless of his reasons for doing that, it is a clear indication of the difference in natural size of these two guys. A lot of people have talked about how Conor Benn's power hasn't travelled up with him because of the Dobson and the Orozco fights. And I can see why people would say that, although there was certainly nothing in Dobson's records or Orozco's records that suggested they had poor chins. So to me, it would indicate they had good chins. Now, his power may not travel up, and probably, logic would probably say it doesn't, but it could also be the case that those two guys just had good chins. I think Orozco actually failed a PED test after that fight. Or maybe mistaken, but I think that was the case. And they could have just both had good chins. When Conor Benn beat Sebastian Formella, he didn't stop him. Okay, but he stopped people after that, and people talked about him being a puncher. And this was apparently, supposedly, when he was on the Clomid. But Formella went the distance. Now, do we say Conor Benn couldn't punch because Formella went the distance? If we use that argument, it's a bit of an asinine argument really to use. You have to look at it, everything's situational, and we have to look at it with its individual merits on each individual case. But just because he didn't stop Dobson and because he didn't stop Orozco doesn't necessarily mean that his punch didn't travel up. It could mean that, or it could just mean that both of these guys were as tough as hell and had good chins. This is quite a hard fight to call. It kind of shouldn't be, but it is. The feeling is that if you use boxing logic, Eubank wins, and if if you use boxing logic, that would indicate Eubank is a strong favourite. And I actually do make Eubank a very strong favourite for the number of reasons of he is the naturally bigger guy, he's a naturally stronger guy, he punches harder, he's a bigger man, he's a higher weight, he punches harder, he has the experience, he's fought at a much higher level, it's not even comparable, albeit losing at the very highest level he's boxed against. So for all those reasons, you would make Chris Eubank Jr. a favourite. And we can talk about the weight, and we can talk about, he said, let's look at his last fight. He made this weight against Zarameta and beat Zarameta comfortably enough, although in that fight there were lots of things that weren't great. I released a bit of footage from earlier in the week where it showed Eubank Jr. in the gym with Jonathan Banks, and Eubank Jr. was telling Jonathan Banks how many rounds they were going to do, and then after that they were going to call it a day, which is never a great thing to see for me if you're a fan of a fighter or a fighter, because the trainer should be the boss. It should be a teacher and student relationship. It should be a boss and employee relationship for me. I've never seen, even at amateur level, I've never seen in the gym, I've never seen a fighter dictating to the trainer what they do. You wouldn't fucking dream of it. And that's kind of the arrogance of Eubank Jr. And when you look at Benn's training camp, where he's doing what he's told, there's no doubt. And listen, a fighter who's 35 isn't going to train the same as a fighter who's 26. That is just facts, okay? But you do have to look, and you do have to think that, if you're training for a fight and you've put in the work, this is what the motivating factors are when you're training for a fight, is that if I'm not doing my work, if I'm not getting up and doing my run, in my head, he is. Every time I don't put it in, every time I don't get up and do that run, every time I don't meet that session to the potential I know it should, in my head, my opponent has. And I fucking know it. And that's my driving factor. That should be the driving factor. Now, is it arrogance for Eubank to not train to the same level because that arrogance tells him he is that much better and doesn't need to? Because in the back of the mind somewhere, I'm pretty sure, take that arrogance away, the other guy's doing the work and you're not. And that can play games with your head. Eubank Jr., there's a lot of talk, I've heard a lot of people say how he loves the uppercut, and because of Conor Benn's style, how the uppercut could be the deciding factor. I'm not so sure of that, because if you look at Conor Benn, if you look at the natural weight sort of disparity, the natural height difference, And then you look at the fact that Conor Benn uses a really, really wide stance. And when you have a really, really wide stance, that brings your height down even lower. And then you look at Conor Benn, you saw him in a public workout and you saw him do this in fights. Even in the wide stance, he will then drop to a squat from that wide stance, taking him really low. And there does become a point of height where you kind of make the uppercut a little bit void, because the uppercut only develops its power on the way up. And if that uppercut hasn't got the space to travel up, it's kind of a bit void. There's nothing behind it. An uppercut at the bottom of its arc is really nothing. The uppercut needs to come up, and that's where it develops its power. And when Conor Benn comes in so low, you might be able to touch him, but there's going to be nothing in that uppercut. So I don't know how much of a sort of a plus the uppercut is going to be against Benn, depending on Benn's approach. I do look at this. A lot of the popular opinion seems to be Conor Benn by stoppage. Conor Benn's is going to be dangerous for sort of 4 to 6 rounds. After that, we favour Eubank down the stretch if it goes long. So a lot of people are picking, if it goes long, are picking Eubank. Now, I don't really see this happening for a number of reasons, because if Eubank wins the fight on points, that will indicate that Eubank had the better of Benn in the majority of the rounds. Now, I don't see Eubank being physically able to outwork Benn for 12 rounds. I think Benn's tank is just going to be better. His punch volume is going to be higher because he's younger, he's smaller, he's got the better engine at this point. His punch output will be greater than Eubank's at this point. So I don't, and I've said this many times in videos before, I don't always think Eubank's style lends itself to winning rounds ultimately at the highest level. He's an enigma, and he does, there's a lot of posture and a lot of posing, but he doesn't have a style that lends itself to really winning rounds for me. So I find Eubank on points not that much of a likely outcome. And this is the other reason why. As I said before, if Eubank wins this fight on points, if that's what we're led to believe, that indicates he has the better of Benn over the majority of the rounds, okay? Now, if that's the case, if Eubank is getting the better of Benn over the majority of the rounds, that means Eubank is landing a lot of punches. And if Eubank is having that much success, I think he stops Conor Benn. I think the bigger, stronger man, having the more success, landing more punches, he will stop Conor Benn before the distance ends. Inside the distance, he stops Benn. Therefore, Eubank doesn't win on points, because if Eubank is that successful in the fight against Conor Benn, I think he stops Conor Benn. And that's what I see more likely in terms of Eubank. I also think with Eubank, it depends a lot on the approach Eubank takes. Conor Benn is going to be trying to roll away from the jab, bob and weave, roll, come underneath, come to the side, and he's going to want to come underneath the jab, roll past the jab, and come in that way. Eubank has to make a decision very early. Now, I don't think he can really match Conor Benn up close on the real inside, because Conor Benn's got the shorter limbs, he's got the lower centre of gravity, his punches are shorter and snappier. I don't think Eubank will be able to compete in those scenarios. In the mid-distance, yes, but ultimately fully up close, I think Benn being a shorter man, lower centre of gravity, shorter arms, shorter arc on the punches is going to be more beneficial for Benn. I think Eubank has to decide whether I gamble and try and pick Benn off on the way in, maybe using the uppercut if the opportunity allows, or the hooks or the straight shots on the way in, or does he let Conor Benn roll underneath, come underneath the jab or around the jab, let him get on the inside, and then does Chris Eubank old man him, maul him, tie him up on the inside, lean on him, drain that fire out of him, put water on the fire. Conor Benn's bringing fire. He's going to try and extinguish that by getting up, throw close, throwing a blanket over the flames. It's ugly. It's not going to be pretty, but to me, that's the way that Chris Eubank goes about winning this fight, if he used to do it. Conor Benn's going to try and get in. He's going to use that head movement, that quick feet, that low centre of gravity to get on the inside. And for me, if Eubank is going to win this fight, he has to throw that blanket over the flames at every opportunity. Get Benn, smother him, hold him, lean on him, drain that energy away. And if Chris Eubank does that, he could take the fight on points. Although doing that, he's still got to win points. He's still got to score points even though he does smother Benn. So for me, Chris Eubank, to me, the most obvious way to victory for him is an ugly win, and that is by smothering Benn up close, draining the energy away, pouring water over the flames, tying him up, locking him up, leaning on him, old manning him around, manoeuvring him around. Let Conor Benn feel you're naturally stronger, you're naturally bigger, you're naturally the stronger guy. Move him about, throw him about, smother him. That will protect Conor Benn. It'll give him Conor Benn. It won't let him do his work, and it'll set things in motion in Conor Benn's mind. I'm getting manhandled by this guy. I'm getting moved about, thrown about, and I can't do my work. Frustration might set in, and I think if Eubank goes about the fight that way, it may lead to him getting a mid to late stoppage. For Conor Benn, I do honestly think Conor Benn's a better fighter than people give him credit for. I think he's smarter. I think he's technically better. When I was watching him in the public workout the other day, when he was doing the getting inside and then he would switch his feet, spin round to the side, then spin off to the other side for the hooks and the uppercuts, he looked really good. He looked really polished. And he is the quicker guy. I was watching Eubank against Arameta the other day, and from about 3-4 rounds in, I've never really noticed this that much with Eubank before, and I watched it now. It's kind of glaring. Eubank gets to a point where he starts to launch in with the uppercut, and then he starts to launch in with sort of with hooks, almost with a bit of a Superman punch about him. And when he launches himself in, after that, his feet are absolutely fucking all over the place. His body position is terrible. His position in the ring is awful, and his feet are absolutely all over the place. And it was quite alarming to see. I've never really looked out for it before, but go back and watch it. Go back and watch how badly positioned Eubank is after he does these things. Where Benn is very compact, he's very neat, he's very tight, everything's very short. I don't know if Chris Eubank at this stage of his career can do enough to deter Conor Benn in any other way than to smother him and to sort of tie him up and old man him. I just think Benn is that much faster. His volume is that much bigger. I'm not sure if Eubank Jr. can live with it at this point, other than for the other reasons I said. Is Eubank going to be affected by the weight? Yes, but no more than he's been affected really in these last few fights. He's going to have had an uncomfortable night staying within that 10 pound, yes. But by the time he gets to the ring, are the conditions of this fight and the weight rehydration clause going to have a massive factor? 15 hours after, like I said before, there used to be a time when people weighed in on the same day. I just don't know if, there comes a time, doesn't there, in fights and in fighters where the stars align, timings are correct. And I've gone back and watched the Liam Smith versus Eubank Jr. fight, and there was no elbow. I, for a long time, thought there was because that knockout was so out of character. It was so out of character to see Eubank. He'd never even been close to being hurt like that. So to me, on an initial watch of that, I thought there must have been an elbow because Liam Smith doesn't punch like that and Chris Eubank Jr. doesn't get hurt like that. But having studied it since, there was no elbow. And it was just a shot that Eubank didn't see. It was just a shot that Eubank didn't see. Yes, Liam Smith isn't a massive one-punch knockout artist. He isn't. But it doesn't matter. You don't have to be. If you get hit with a shot that you don't see, it doesn't really matter. I've seen guys dropped in the gym by jabs I didn't see. It doesn't really matter. If you don't see it, it doesn't matter. So, yeah. And if we're going to talk about power, you can get hit with a shot, say a hook, with a head guard on. That's a full face guard. And if you get hit on the point of the chin and that whips your head, that's the one that does the damage. When your head gets whipped, you can do it with a head guard on. The effect is exactly the same. There's also, I don't know if you saw yesterday, now this was a point of some contention. I don't know if it's been talked about a lot. So when they had the choice for the gloves yesterday, Eubank's team protested at the fact that Conor Benn's gloves were horsehair gloves. Now, this is quite significant because the gloves that Liam Smith was wearing when they boxed and he got stopped, they were horsehair gloves. And they've obviously got an issue. Excuse me. I think I'm coming down with COVID. Excuse me a sec. Sorry, we're back. Yeah, so Team Eubank were protesting at the fact that Conor Benn's gloves are horsehair gloves. Now, horsehair gloves compact in a way, in a different way. They compact down to, first of all, they compact very quickly within a fight, and they end up becoming quite hard, quite very hard. They behave differently than any other gloves, really, than any other glove filling. So, and this is what Liam Smith was wearing when they got knocked out, and this is what Conor Benn is wearing this time. And Team Eubank were really quite vigorously protesting over this. And I think Robert Smith was there, and Robert Smith said, look, we've okayed them. We've okayed them. And it's like, again, this is a bit like with a weigh-in. Chris Eubank, to me, seemed like he arrived late, okay? So he arrived late because I think he was trying to get that last bit of weight off, which again is a miscalculation. Had he arrived on time, got on the scale and knew what his weight was on that scale, forget your scales, use the scales you're getting weighed at. If he'd arrived on time, got on that scale, and he had an hour left to lose it, he'd have been in a better position. Instead, what it looks like he did is he was late because he was trying to get the last pounds off. He got there with 5 minutes to go, got on the scale, and he's over. Now he's only got 5 minutes. So again, a miscalculation, and this with the gloves seems to me like a little bit of a lack of professionalism, because if you were worried about the opponent wearing horsehair gloves and you didn't want that, you should have been clear on that early on in the contract negotiations and earlier on with your communications with the board. You should have known this up front, and you didn't. This has come as a surprise to you at the last minute when you come down to glove selection and you've seen what gloves Conor Benn is going to wear. So again, that to me is a lack of sort of professionalism by Team Eubank. Prediction. Using boxing logic, I think Eubank wins this fight. I think Eubank wins this fight by old manning Benn to a degree, smothering Benn's work up close. As I said before, sort of pouring water over the flames, putting a blanket over the fire, smothering him, holding him, not letting Benn work up close, using his greater height, his greater strength to just claim him, turn him, wrestle him, drain him, push him away, and then catch him on the way in again. That's what my head says. My gut just tells me Conor Benn's going to do this. They always say that fighting on anger is a bad thing. You shouldn't fight on anger because your emotions can get the better of you. If the anger matches the desire, I think that can be a very powerful weapon. And as long as you can sort of implement some measure of control in your approach whilst being fueled by the anger, I think it can be very dangerous. Eubank Jr. should win this fight, and I'd imagine him winning it in the ways that I would say. But when you go out and you see something you want to buy, and you're thinking, "God, I really want that." Could be a car, could be a watch, could be anything. You go and you think, I really fancy that. I really fancy that. But your head's saying, "Don't be stupid. That's an extravagant buy. You don't need it. It's a waste of money. Be sensible." But you go, I fucking want that, and you end up buying it. You know what I mean? You might regret it later on, which I've done many times. But this is like that. My head is telling me Conor Benn can't win. Conor Benn can't win. But my gut is telling me this crazy signal that Conor Benn wins. And there is timing. We have got an older Chris Eubank and we have got a young, hungry Conor Benn. So I might throw all boxing logic aside and say that while Chris Eubank Jr. should win this, and should win this fairly comfortably, something in me just says Conor Benn was going to win. Conor Benn is going to win. I don't know. Listen, I try to picture Conor Benn in there against the Conor Benn that fought Peter Dobson, against the Chris Eubank Jr. that fought Zaramata. Oh, I don't know. I'm going to go out on a limb. And I'm going to say Chris Eubank Jr. should win but I think Conor Benn will win in what could be a fantastic affair. I don't say that with any degree of confidence. I'm more confident that Chris Eubank Jr. wins, even though I'm going to pick Conor Benn. Does that make sense? Anyway, I'll see you all soon. Have a good day.